All right, so let's get started with today's show. So this is going to be an amazing show. You see, sometimes with what I do in the fitness doctor and operations and all my colleagues, I end up in these amazing conversations with people who are just genius level leaders of the exercise science, health, fitness, nutrition industry. And I don't mean the marketers. I don't mean people that are just trying to push stuff on you. I mean the people who are deep into the science and have been deep into the science for 30, 40 years. The people who hang around the universities and are doing all the clinical research and actually running all the studies that then come back and teach us about things that we end up picking up on in the fitness field. So I like to spend a lot of time connecting and speaking with people like that. And Will Brink is one of those people who is our guest expert on our show today. And Will has quite the background. Will originally started off as a career student into his 30s. He has the equivalent of a couple master's degrees, in addition to having graduated from Harvard University in one of the hardest science programs to graduate from. He had professors who were such high level. He had a professor that actually developed the Krebs cycle, or discovered the Krebs cycle. And what is the Krebs cycle? What the heck is that, Robbie? Well, the Krebs cycle is, and that's not going to help, but I'll give my third attempt at this will help. So that's the oxidative energy pathway, which means how does your body produce energy with oxygen? That's basically what the Krebs cycle is. It's all these many multi-step process to take oxygen, fat, and carbohydrate and produce energy from it. So obviously it's extremely technical. If you ever look that up on Google or in a textbook, it's like you have no idea what you're looking at. Well, one of his professors actually developed that. So this is the level he's been educated from. The other really cool thing about Will is he's been an editor in the muscle magazines from the 80s. So from the 80s, he was an editor. In the 90s and even into the early 2000s, he was an editor. And he not only was he an editor for all these science and supplement topics, so he's seen everything come out over the last 30 years, but he's also worked with many of the researchers. Many of these people are also his close friends. And so he's been there. He's been in the trenches. He's helped some of the best companies in the world develop products, some of the best supplements in the world as well. Also, full disclaimer, he does have one product that he sells that he is financially attached to, and that is called Alpha Joe coffee supplement. And we may or may not get into it because right now he's actually out of stock and he couldn't sell it to you if he wanted to. But any supplement we talk to, there's no financial claim. There's no financial attachment from me. There's no financial attachment from Will either. Why do we do this? Because I think these conversations I have privately are absolutely amazing. And I want my VIPs and others to be able to hear these messages and know what the truth is about supplements and things that truly, truly affect your health. Because if I can help just one of you seriously improve your health, that's worth it. But I know that 100% of those who listen to what we have to share today are going to get a lot of value and some life and health improvement from that. So Will, I want to welcome you to our show and thank you for being here, buddy.
Thank you, everybody. Hope you don't mind my messy office.
What we're going to cover today. So we are going to cover one of the most powerful antioxidants in the world and specifically how that works. We're going to cover one of the most powerful anti-aging proteins. We're going to cover a supplement that will both make you stronger and what is one of the best nutrients for brain health and is highly brain protective. So it may very well protect you. It's very possible that it could protect you from things such as dementia and Alzheimer's. It is a newer supplement looking on the brain health side, but there's amazing findings coming out. And it's a supplement that, quite interesting, was used in the bodybuilding world for many years for a strength supplement that's now being seen as being just as, if not more effective for brain health and especially anti-aging. We'll also talk about one of the most primary undervalued and underaddressed causes of aging, which is both the same for COVID symptoms as it is for other chronic diseases. So my friend, Will, I'm going to help keep you on track here. Because we got a lot of deep stuff to cover. So I'm going to both apologize to you and the audience when and if I feel like I need to interrupt you or kind of move forward and adjust things. So I'm going to be the Will Brink.
Sound like my ex-wife.
Yes. let's talk about COVID first, actually, because it's on the top of everyone's mind, and I see one of our VIPs have already posted about that. So I was going to leave that one for last, but let's go there, and let's not let this go political, right? So let's not get too much into vaccines and that type of thing. Let's just talk about health, the human body, what it's up against, what is the biochemistry of the things that happen with COVID that is also similar, as we've talked about, that happens with many other chronic diseases like heart disease, like cancer, like diabetes, right? There's a similar pathway that is being affected there, and there's things that each of you can do to help improve your health, both outside of ever having contracted COVID or before, during, and after COVID. So Will, I'm going to let you take it away from there.
Specific to COVID, of course, yeah, the data is I think the data has been very consistent that at least adequate vitamin D levels are very strongly associated with minimal effects of COVID. That's been very consistent. The direct intervention test, that is where you actually take a group and give them vitamin D, have not been as robust and quite as interesting from their effect. But honestly, I don't find that really that surprising, to be honest with you. But I think vitamin D has gotten a lot of attention. Excuse me, a lot of attention, in the medical community, and for sort of become the darling of vitamins in COVID, which is fine. Vitamin D is great, definitely want it, but it really is one of a handful, tip of the iceberg, frankly. Stuff that I would take and I recommend people take. For example, just out of left field, vitamin D does not work without enough magnesium. Now magnesium, the deficiency, there's about a 50-60% deficiency of vitamin D in the population. However, magnesium deficiency runs 80 to 90%. So let's just say pretty much everybody who is not taking a magnesium supplement watching this video is probably deficient in magnesium, if I was to, guess. And I think that's a really, really important one, because so what happens is that magnesium is a cofactor to all the enzymes. Vitamin D, like a lot of things, doesn't itself do anything. It has to metabolize into other things, what we call downstream metabolites. And for it to do that, all the enzymes that do those conversions require magnesium. Magnesium is a cofactor to every single one of those enzymes. And so I had written, there's an article again on Brinkstone, so I don't just, if you go to Brinkstone, you'll find it. I think I called the article Magnesium is the Key to the Big D, or something like that. It's easy, you'll find it. But anyway,
quick question.
And there's also,
quick question. What form of magnesium should they take? Because there are multiple. So what form and how much?
Magnesium citrate has good data, and it's inexpensive. That's pretty much my default magnesium. I mean, you just don't want to take like magnesium oxide, which is basically chalk, which is the cheapest thing you're going to find, of course. But citrate's fine. But there's other ones. There's gluconate and a bunch of magnesiums. There's actually one company, forget their name too. They actually put together. I really like their product because they put like 6 or 8 different types of magnesium, together into one product. But citrate is inexpensive. It has good data. It's absorbable. The cheapest thing that most companies will use is basically oxide, which is like calcium, which is, chalk. So there, I mean, there's a real simple thing. We say vitamin D, and then I always have to kind of like throw in like magnesium. And if you're taking vitamin D, you really probably should be taking vitamin K. Vitamin D requires vitamin K to actually function properly, and so on and so on. So it's like when I see a study where they've used like one thing, vitamin D or C, and they say, well, we didn't see an effect. Modern Western medicine understandably wants to isolate and look at one thing. That is what they do. They're not interested in, but the body just doesn't work that way. And so I understand if you were to say, you take 3 things, you took C, D, and zinc, and you had great effects. Well, from the modern scientist point of view, they don't know what worked. They're going to say, well, that's great, but what was it? We need to isolate what worked. So there's a little bit of a problem in a lot of those studies with vitamins, and again, as a scientist type, I totally understand what they're trying to do is to isolate what exactly worked, and they don't like multi-ingredient type studies like that because it messes with their scientist brain. Now, we all, frankly, don't give a damn how it worked as long as it worked, right? This is where, from our perspective, that's my perspective. I'm like, look, now Eastern medicine, Eastern approach is a little different in that Eastern is more about finding things that work and then figuring out how it works later on. And they may say, well, we don't really know how it works, but it works, so we're going to be happy. And so that has always been the Eastern Western kind of mindset where like I said, you'll find out the Chinese have been taking some herb for 2,000 years and they have no idea how it works, but it works. So they're happy. Now, us Western types, that our head explodes when we hear about things like that, because we need to isolate everything down to its, in fact, a really interesting vitamin D study came out just recently that followed those metabolites, those downstream metabolites, and found one in particular, I forget the name of it, was like the most effective for COVID, which is pretty cool, but they don't sell it. But again, if you're taking enough D, you're taking your magnesium, you will be making that metabolite. So answer the question, D is very important. I consider it really, really tip of the iceberg kind of a thing. And it's just gotten a lot of attention, with the medical community, and rightly so, but onto itself, I don't get that excited.
So they want to take vitamin D, magnesium citrate, and K, but K we need to be careful of, right? Because it can cause coagulation in too high of a dosage, right?
Yeah,
so especially in a population where they're over the age of 50, we need to be a little careful with.
Yeah, 200 mics seems to be the standard dose for K. Again, I tend to think, again, what's that?
200, I'm just clarifying, 200 micrograms vitamin K.
Yeah. So again, I tend to think older people, for the most part, if anything, lean more towards hypercoagulation than thin blood, quote unquote. I mean, I think if any, like, why do they recommend taking an aspirin? Because it thins blood. Taking fish oil, helps. So I think unless you're really overdosing on the K, I don't get real worried personally. I'm still more, again, if we are talking sort of COVID specifically, we're obviously very aware of hypercoagulation, that is thickening blood. So we want to go in the other direction and during this COVID time or whatever, maybe lean toward the thinner blood than anything that has the potential to hypercoagulate.
Right. So okay. So vitamin D would be about 2,000 IU per day, right? So that's 2,000 IU.
Now I would go way higher than that myself. It is completely non-toxic. And this is, again, you and I taught, a million years ago, we're in school, right? We were taught the fat soluble vitamins, A, D, K, quote unquote, can be toxic. Complete bullshit. Pretty much A is about the only one of all those fat soluble vitamins that at high doses could be a problem. There are studies of people being given 100,000 IUs a day, 100,000 IUs a day of D for months with zero toxicity. So I tend to lean, again, considering what we're always looking at risk to benefit. I also highly recommend people, if they want to know, they just go get your 25, your OHD levels test. You want to get a blood test and what your D status is. Next time you see your doctor or whatever, or you just go to the lab and ask for a D status test, which is 25 OHD, and you'll know. But I will tell you that most people, almost everybody, doesn't seem to get up to those levels that they want without less than about 5,000 IUs a day. And there's people that need a lot more, whole lot more. And I tend to suspect now that those people that need a whole lot more are probably magnesium deficient. I'm still working on that one. But so my personal at this point is again, what is your, risk to benefit is kind of something I always approach. Everything I look at, I tend to look from that risk to benefit thing. And so the question is, what is the risk from a bit more D than you need versus not having enough D if you get COVID? Well, I know the answer to that's really simple for me. So my personal, I wouldn't take less than 5,000 IUs a day of D. That would be the best way to take D is to just get your blood levels checked. And then you don't have to ask the question. Then it's not a mystery. Then you know exactly what you're doing.
Let's repeat that. And so if you haven't had your vitamin D checked with your doctor, it's 25 OHD.
Yes.
25 OHD.
Yeah. And again,
so Will,
yes,
people that have a lot of vitamin D are less likely to contract COVID?
So the studies, it appears, I don't know about less likely to contract, but less likely to have hospitalization and serious complications. I don't think it may not impact your ability to get it. But if you do get it, at least the studies find a very strong correlation with those who have the highest vitamin D levels are the least likely to suffer serious complications. They're the people that seem to just get the sniffles and, and blow their nose and be done with it. And that's been a very consistent finding.
And let's talk about do your best to try to keep this on the understandable side. But you totally are. But I know that we're going to go into an area that can get complicated. So in terms of COVID and all the chronic diseases such as cancer, diabetes, right? All towards types of inflammatory disease, chronic diseases, heart disease. Let's talk about the iron release in the reactive oxygen species, right? So let's try to make that as understandable as possible, and how it's really the foundational thing that you've been seeing and that you've been speaking with other scientists, colleagues that are really researching this, and how it's really the foundational pathway of problem.
Well, I think it is. I can't get anybody to pay any attention to it. It's been very frustrating, to be honest with you. But yeah, the model, my understanding from when all this got started, it was written in some of the earliest studies that the Chinese published in Nature, was that COVID basically interferes with iron metabolism and what called heme iron. So heme iron is where your iron is bound up, right? And your body keeps it bound. Iron is very, very oxidative stuff. It's very damaging if it's free, i.e. rust. Just think rust. So the studies that I had read early on suggested, which the Chinese wrote, was that COVID basically causes a big release of free iron, damages your iron supply, which causes a huge thing, what we call oxidative stress. And that's when the hyperimmune thing happens. So everybody's sort of cytokine storm, right? So
no,
and
no, not everybody hasn't heard of cytokine storm. No. So hold on. Yeah. So let's.
Well, it's a buzzword used in the media. I'm not saying you understand it, but I'm assuming most people raise your hand if you've heard the term cytokine. Okay. See everybody's hands. I thought so.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
Our VIPs are more.
I did it.
All right. So Patricia didn't. So, I mean, they may not understand exactly what it does, but they've heard the term, and the more I've read and the more I research, the more convinced I've become, and the more supported those studies have become, that the primary mode of damage from COVID appears to be this, like you say, this release of free iron, which causes a huge spike in oxidative stress and cytokine storm. And of course, what the doctors are doing, and they're doing a very good job of it too, I might add, is they're addressing it at the cytokine storm spot. But by then you're already behind the curve. So you're already in trouble now if they're addressing at that spot. And what they should be doing is addressing it the stage earlier and preventing, addressing this what they call reactive oxygen species. So iron releases, all these huge bursts of oxidative stress. You've all heard of antioxidants, obviously. That's a common term. And antioxidants address oxidative stress. But the iron thing seems to be the key to the whole damn thing, from what I can figure out. And I don't know if you look, Robbie, you look at my article, you see how much sources there are.
And what are you seeing in terms of what can help optimize the body in terms of that?
So the key to that appears to be glutathione. Now, and on that one, people probably heard the term, and may again be familiar with glutathione, not totally, but glutathione, and I've been researching glutathione for almost 40 years now. Again, it keeps coming back into my life. I first heard of glutathione when I started researching whey protein in the early 90s. And so glutathione is what is sort of the master antioxidant. So everybody's heard that, they know vitamin C and D and E, and they know the term antioxidant. Well, you have to think of glutathione as sort of really the master of them all. It sits on top of all of those and controls your immune system. It recycles all the other antioxidants like C and zinc. Well, zinc isn't technically an antioxidant, but you know where I'm going with this. The glutathione has a tremendous number of unique and important aspects to aging, to cancer. It's one of these ubiquitous things that comes around in the literature all the time. It's always popping up on my radar, just because I'm always reading stuff. Glutathione, it typically, again, as we get older, you're producing less and less glutathione. It's very tightly connected to aging and various diseases and so forth. So the key to this iron situation, along with a lot of other things, again, you're talking about a disease or a virus that's just too sneaky and too powerful and too creative to be addressed by one thing. But when we're talking about, as you asked, the iron thing, glutathione is really the key. And there was an excellent paper that was put out by a researcher who basically his conclusion was that all the negative effects of COVID are due to glutathione deficiency. Or glutathione, basically your body uses up glutathione and you can't make any more. You've run out. So, and again, don't worry about it. If anybody is, you can go to Brink's Own or whatever and read this article. And so don't worry too much about it. It's a kind of a heavy article. I mean, I really try my best to write articles where people that are, way up there on the science level can get what they need from it, but people that are not can get what they need from it. This has always been, I think, my strong point in the magazines. And I used to write I wasn't really an editor. I've done some editing, as Robbie said, but actually I wrote for all the magazines at one time or another. And the reason I had a good following and people followed my stuff is I can do a pretty good balance of kind of giving people on both ends of the spectrum what they need to take away from this. So maintaining glutathione along with the other antioxidants appears to be key. And that comes down to controlling that reactive oxygen species produced by iron, the free iron. And iron is a very interesting compound because we can't live without it, but it is very, very toxic stuff. The body really has to control iron very tightly. And as we age, there's no doubt at all, again, there's some very good papers on iron status being related to cancer and heart disease. We know that men that give blood a couple times a year reduce their risk of heart disease considerably. That's due to the iron. That's due to getting rid of some of that excess iron floating around. They're even working on some drugs to control iron better, which it's just them looking for stuff they can make money off of, because lactoferrin, which is one of the most miraculous supplements out there, called lactoferrin, which again we'll get you that. Lactoferrin is a peptide. It can be found in whey, and its sole job is basically in the body is to control iron, and does so very well.
So let's kind of talk around this subject before we go, because I see us going forward into talking about NAC and then whey next. But before we do, let's talk about a couple interesting things.
Right.
And that is, one is we hear, oh, red meat is bad for you. Shouldn't eat too much red meat, right? But if it's a really natural grass-fed source, it's organic, it can in fact be really good for you. It has more to do with free iron and the body not shuttling the iron to do what it's supposed to be doing, which is typically, just as Will is saying, is a deficiency in the other nutrients, because there are all these big chain reactions in the body, just like you're learning about in biomechanics and training your body that way. It's not just one muscle. It's all about the movement and how everything coordinates together. So the biochemistry, just like the biomechanics, is the same way. So for example, with red meat, the research that they've been finding is that, yes, red meat has shown to have negative results for your body in research, but they're doing in typically a SAD diet, and SAD is standard American diet. So the standard American diet, which is low on fruits and veggies, which is low on some other things like from the Mediterranean diet, such as whole sources of grains and legumes and that type of thing. But once we have the fruits and veggies very high and we have all these other nutrients, then it helps shuttle the iron through and do what it needs to do in the body. Before we move forward, you agree with that, Will?
Yeah. I mean, I think to a point. I mean, unfortunately, the old giving red meat a bad name is just the usual lack of balance in the diet of most people's diets, of course. I have a pretty lengthy article on Brink's on vegan eating, if anyone's interested in that. But yeah, the data is pretty clear that lean red meat from the right sources in a balanced approach to eating, Mediterranean is the name that should keep coming up in people's mind, as the consistently the diet that is associated with the best health and all that, which is a Mediterranean approach. Doesn't get its as much attention as it should, because it's boring.
Right.
You know, I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah,
it's just not
exactly.
exciting. It's not exciting. It's really hard to market, you know, a Mediterranean diet. I mean, our doctor's written books, Mediterranean this, Mediterranean that, but, you know, it's just not radical enough, you know, but it's very consistent. There's something called blue zones in the world where the very high preponderance of people that live over 100 years old, and for reasons they weren't sure, and they call blue zones. And so they went and studied these blue zones as to find out what's going on with these people. And it consistently, pretty much all 6 out of the 7 were just, you know, basically Mediterranean based eating approaches, with, of course, other stuff. I mean, you know, nutrition is just one leg. Other things like socialization and, you know, getting exercise and staying, you know, within your weight and all that good stuff. The only one out of the 7 that wasn't a straight up was a Seventh-day Adventist, you know, block of they tend to live over 100 pretty consistently. And when and these blue zones also, when we're talking about over 100, we're talking about functional people at 100 who are still out doing things and working and, you know, tilling gardens and having a life. You know, we're not talking about, you know, 100 years old in a house, you know, in some farm where you're stuck watching TV or something. So the blue zones are interesting, where they can really go and look at, again, Okinawa is another one, kind of a famous, you know, place where people, I think Okinawa is the highest proportion of people live over 100 in the world, I believe. Yes, they did. I don't know what the, and yeah, it was Mediterranean-ish. So yeah, limited red meat, but not zero red meat. And as you'd expect, mostly fish, fowl, lots of vegetables, healthy oils, a lot of herbs. That's another thing people miss in our American diet. A lot of herbs, you know, garlic and turmeric and that type of thing. Those are loaded with healthy, health promoting type compounds that people, especially in the US, you know, don't get enough of with our highly processed SAD diet. What a fitting name, SAD.
Right. Yeah.
Not a perfect name, standard
Yeah.
American diet. I mean, it's like you can't make that stuff up. I wonder if they did that on purpose or just by coincidence happened to be called SAD. But what a guy. I always laugh at that one.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure it was on purpose.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, red meat. I like say I'm a fan of again, typical Americans. Red meat should be, as you said, you know, it shouldn't be. It's not a Fred Flintstone sized piece of meat. We're talking about like 6 ounces. You know, nice little lean piece of red meat with, you know, salad and whatever. We're not talking, you know, again, Fred Flintstone sized T-bone monster steaks. This is why, again, we Americans have to do everything supersized. Everything's got to be, you know, if 6 ounces of red meat is good, then 70 has got to be better, you know. So
Right.
again, the problem is that moderation is the most boring topic. You can't sell moderation. You can't market moderation. People want to hear the term moderation. So, you know.
But our VIPs are smarter than that. They get it. They understand the optimization through moderation.
Yeah.
So
and the iron, coming back to the iron thing. So, you know, think about iron in red meat is it is in the heme form. It is the most absorbable, stable form, and it comes in the heme form. But too much intake of red meat is associated with, you know, excess iron, and that is going to be, and that will be associated with aging and increased rates of cancer and so forth. But that iron is so, apparently, from everything I'm reading, so intimately connected to COVID and where it goes from a sniffle and something not so bad to, you know, killing you, seems to be that pathway. And I have been trying to get my doctor friends and scientists, media, a little more interested in this topic. And it's been, you know, it's been hard. I think it's just a tough, they don't get a lot of, it's a tough area for doctors. Because remember, they don't have a lot of nutritional training. It's very deep. I mean, if you look at some of the papers that you know, it really gets deep, and you're just going to have to, and I think for a lot of them, it just kind of goes like, okay, well, you know, I guess, sure, you know, take your D and here I'm like trying to say, fellas, this is it. This is the crux to the whole thing, as far as I can tell.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult for, you know, some, because they're focused on treating the disease instead of, you know, the health optimization pathway.
Yeah.
But so Will, so we talked about glutathione, and you and I have talked about before that actually NAC can actually, it has ways, you've mentioned that NAC can actually be better for glutathione than glutathione itself for some specific reasons. So let's go into that, and then we'll jump into the best anti-aging protein and why you feel that, and let's give a recommendation on that.
So NAC, as I'm assuming most people out there have heard of NAC, right? Raise of hands, N-acetyl. So it's called N-acetylcysteine. So here we are talking. So we're talking about D and C and zinc, and everybody has heard about those. But NAC, if I could only take one supplement, like, you know, because I had a gun to my head, it'd probably be NAC as far as COVID is concerned and basic immunity and that type of thing. So N-acetylcysteine is the precursor, is a direct precursor to producing glutathione. So we're coming back full circle to glutathione. Glutathione is itself, you would say, okay, well, why take that? Why don't I just take glutathione? Well, glutathione is you know, not well absorbed orally. It's a peptide, so of course the body chops it up into little pieces, and you don't get much in there. Even intravenously, glutathione does not transfer that well into cells out of your serum. And it just makes sense. Again, we typical humans, we say, okay, this is the molecule, it does a thing, so why wouldn't I want to eat that? It makes perfect sense. But if you think from the body's perspective, what is the body getting? The body is used to getting for millennia the precursors to making its own stuff. And so in many, many cases, the body literally prefers the precursor over the whole thing. Not always, sometimes, you know, sometimes it's happy with it, sometimes it's not. But it's common sense to say, well, okay, glutathione's good, why don't I take glutathione? Whereas the body has been producing glutathione from its constituent parts for, you know, a million years or whatever. Glutathione is one of the oldest molecules ever found, and it's ubiquitous in all creatures. And it's a very small molecule. It's only 3 amino acids long. So on the surface, it doesn't always sound like common sense to say, well, why would the precursor be better than the actual molecule? And that's because, like I say, the body often will prefer to make its own stuff. A lot of things are that way, especially things that have to cross the blood-brain barrier. The brain is very, very choosy about what it lets through, and it does not like to let large molecules through. It's usually going to either break it down and then put it back together. A lot of stuff what the body will do is take the molecule, break it down into its constituent parts, shuttle it into something, and then put it back together. Creatine phosphate, just going quickly, ATP. Everybody thought, well, that's what the cell uses. Well, why don't we use ATP? Because when on swallowing it, the body cleaves it in half into creatine and phosphate and puts it back together. You know, so obviously that occurred to somebody, well, okay, let's just use creatine, and that's how that went. So N-acetylcysteine is now, some of you, if you've been watching the news and stuff, I don't know if you're aware, but of course the FDA, in all of its wisdom, is going after NAC and trying to get it off the market. Why? Well, we could be a little conspiratorial and say because it works. I don't know, but NAC, you know, they kind of left NAC alone. Out of the blue, it's getting used a lot. Most alternative doctors, anybody that's done any research is using NAC, I think just in general, but certainly for COVID. And you can use that. And NAC also is used in hospitals intravenously. If you go to the hospital, it is what we call standard of care. If you have Tylenol overdose and your liver's dying, they're going to plug you into NAC. They're going to put a bag of IV, and they're going to boost you up with a bunch of NAC to save your liver, because that's how protective it is. If you overdose on Tylenol, again, we're talking about that oxidative stress. Well, and I don't know if most of you are aware, but Tylenol is the #1 drug for causing liver failure and liver transfers in this country, about 1,500 a year. So don't take Tylenol unless you have to for short periods of time, just as your doctor prescribes. I mean, doctors will tell you, you know, you're only supposed to take it, but you got people that, you know, wake up in the morning and pop Tylenol and have for years. So NAC, the nice thing about NAC is that at least it's in the system, because again, doctors are what they are. They really don't, especially in their hospitals, they really don't like to use things that they're not either comfortable with or they're not aware of, or it's not in their system. They can't, you know, write for it or use it, what we call, you know, off label. But the nice thing about NAC, at least, that it is in their system. They use NAC for a couple of things. It's also a very good expectorant. They use it with Robbie, what's that lung disease? It's genetic, and they can't get the phlegm out and they die. Almost nobody lives past about 18 or so. Anybody remember what I'm talking about here? It's a disease. It's a genetic disease. I don't. It'll come to me. It's a horrible disease too because the kids die. Yeah, cystic fibrosis. There you go. So Chris Durham just throws cystic fibrosis. Horrible disease.
Good job, Chris.
Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. It's an awful disease, and usually you don't live past about 18 to 20 years old. It's a genetic, but NAC is helpful as an expectorant to get that gunk and that junk out. So NAC is very protective of makes glutathione. Your immune system needs glutathione, especially your T cells, is a big one. And glutathione, you can read books on. I mean, I'm pretty good friends with a guy named Dr. Jimmy Gutman, who literally wrote the book on glutathione. And he's a friend of mine, and we're always sending to each other back and forth studies on glutathione. And actually, if you read my article, you saw at the very end of it, he also added a little something in there at the end of the COVID article. So I asked him to weigh in on my article and read it, and he added some of his own thoughts at the end. So NAC is pretty interesting stuff. It's not perfect stuff, as always. It's not that well absorbed. It's not that efficient. I mean, there you go. Life extension. So he's holding up not just NAC, but Life Extension NAC, which is a company I've been doing consulting work for 25 years. And I write for their magazine. If you ever go and type in my name at lifeextension.li, you'll see all my articles. I've developed about 6 products for Life Extension. And I had dinner with the owner of Life Extension Thursday night in Palm Beach. So he and I are actually pretty good friends. So there you go. So yeah. So somebody won. You got an award? You got any awards out to anybody? I mean, not only does he have NAC, he has Life Extension NAC, and I mean, he's on it. See, there's one of your members who's on it. Like white on rice. So there you go. So NAC is very interesting stuff, but it's not perfect. I mean, it's and this is where I know you were going to segue and get me off of this and maybe segue into the protein and or something. Do we want to go in that direction?
Yeah.
Should we go towards
So before we go from that, because let's make a clear delineation. So should they or should they not take NAC? Because we're gonna talk about this super amazing protein next. And I know you talk about this protein giving a lot of the benefits of the NAC and the glutathione. So let's create some clarity there as we segue into the whey protein.
All right. Yeah. So I still recommend people take NAC. I do. I take both. I mean, it's not real scientific, but on days I take whey, I might take a little less NAC. On days I don't have whey protein, which is, I don't know, a couple days a week, if I just don't think about it, I'll probably take 1,200 milligrams a day of NAC. 600 milligrams divided into 2 doses. Most NAC products are 600 milligrams. That's a pretty typical dose. And I would, during these times of stress and all this craziness, I take about 1,200 milligrams. If I'm using whey, I'll probably just take half of that dose. I'll take 600. Because you get the thing about glutathione is that it's very short-lived. Dog hair is all driving my throat crazy today. We were cleaning the house and there's dog hair floating around. It's really gotten in my throat and stuff. I'm not allergic, but it aggravates my throat. So one thing about glutathione,
I'm laughing with you, by the way, not
so one thing about glutathione is it's very short-lived. And so, you're better off, spreading it out. Like say you might have your NAC in the morning and your whey at night, whatever combination, thereof. But yeah, so I still recommend NAC. I tend to do both. Like I say, you couldn't really overdose on that. I mean, it won't do you any harm in that respect. And I think 1,200 milligrams of NAC a day is a pretty good. And I'm a big proponent. Like say, if somebody is sick, I mean, in my protocol for those who are, who somebody is really sick, IV NAC. You want to go the IV route and bypass the whole digestion thing, because like I say, they have it at hospitals and they do have it. I did work with one person who's called me up and said, my mother-in-law is going downhill real fast. They want to incubate her. these doctors seem pretty open-minded at least, and so if they're open-minded, I got them on the phone and I said, do you have NAC in store? He said, yeah. Well, what about it? It's for Tylenol overdose. I said, well, do you object to using it on this patient? I mean, we both agree it won't do any harm, right? And he said, no, I suppose not. Now I'll give him credit. That's all I ask for any doctor. Just be open-minded. It's all I ask from any doctor. And he said, yeah, sure. Well, now again, this is anecdotal, but it seemed to help a lot. I mean, she had a pretty serious turnaround. I mean, and they were doing other things, of course, but she was going in a bad direction. And what they were doing was not, which is going to be corticosteroids and things like that, which, have their place for sure. But IV NAC is now that's the thing about one advantage of NAC, of course, versus Whey is you can't use Whey IV, but you can with NAC. So, and I asked them if they had any vitamin C, and of course they didn't have any of that, but they did have NAC, and that was a big plus. It was a huge plus. So yes, on the NAC.
So let's segue and
okay.
Whey protein, right? Whey, because I mean, I've been taking one of the, something I asked for it because it was, when I was a kid, that was really expensive. Whey protein and meal replacement is like $40-$50. My mom's like, what? Why don't you just eat real food? And so when I was 12, 13 years old, I was already asking for whey proteins and stuff. And ever since that time, it never really agreed with my stomach, right? And then, as I've graduated from college and had all these science colleagues and all this stuff, then I've, all the clinical researchers have all shared with me who do nutrition research. Oh, the whey is amazing. It shows such great research. It has such great research results. But like, man, isn't there like inflammatory because it's come from milk? And, and so Will actually just a few weeks ago, he recommended that I try a whey protein that I have not ever tried before. And again, anecdotal evidence, just me, but it's amazing. Like this first time I could take 2 scoops of whey and feel no side effects whatsoever. It agrees with my body perfectly. It was amazing. And then we'll get into this, but the big thing is because the other whey products have so many impurities and stuff in it. So let's talk about which product you really feel is best. But actually, let's make that number 2. Let's talk about whey in its pure best form. Why is that so amazing, and what will that do for people?
All right. So everybody, I'm assuming, has at least heard of whey protein. I would think there'd be almost nobody that hasn't heard of whey protein at this point. So whey protein, but most people who have heard of whey protein probably associate it with sports nutrition, bodybuilding, whatever, which I don't understand to this day. I don't understand why. But so when I first started hearing about whey was early 90s. I mean, way back before the internet. Whey was becoming popular with athletes because it's very high quality protein. It's got the highest biological value. It's got the highest branched chain amino acids. It's got the highest leucine content. It's really is pretty close to a perfect protein from a sports muscle building perspective. And I then started to go into the medical library because, again, this is pre-internet. I mean, I see people out there, some of you are old enough to remember when there was no internet, which is a really hard thing to pick. So this was not a matter of, let me Google that. So I was interested in whey, and I used to spend many of my afternoons in the Harvard and BU medical school libraries. That was where I'd be found on the weekends, pretty much all day. And I pulled out some journal articles on whey by a Dr. Bunos, and just opened up my whole world. And Dr. Bunos passed away, became a friend of mine, just an awesome guy. But so Dr. Bunos had found that whey was a big promoter of glutathione, very, very efficient at promoting glutathione. And he fed it to a bunch of animals and exposed them to toxic cancer-causing chemicals. And only the whey, no matter what else protein they fed them, only the whey would prevent these animals from getting sick. Fed them something called lipopolysaccharide, which is a really nasty chemical they use. It's like a typical chemical they use on animals to make them sick. And if you want to challenge them with something, and only the whey would keep these animals from passing away. And so there was quite a bit of data, which I was not aware of until I started to uncover this. And I, read all of his papers. on whey and found out how old it was. Like whey has been used as a medicinal food since Hippocrates, 3,000 years. There's a couple of old expressions in Italy from about 2,500 years ago that, just whey a day keeps doctors away. And, they used it for infections because it's very, good for your immune system. So I just learned, it opened up a whole new world for me. I had no idea. I thought, again, whey was just good bodybuilding food. And ever since then, again, I've been involved in, he and his company went on to do more research. They did research with HIV. There's a whole bunch of research, again, which you can find on my website. But the crux of why it's so beneficial comes down to glutathione. And and whey is more efficient for producing glutathione than NAC. And this is why I like it so much. Whey contains some these little peptides, which are only found in whey, nowhere else in nature. They're called glutamyl-cysteine peptides, and that's a glutamine and a cysteine connected to each other. So that's two parts of your glutathione, which is glutamine, cysteine, and glycine. And the only food they had ever found that had two of those three amino acids already preformed was in whey. And they're called glutamyl-cysteine peptides. And another thing that whey has is called cysteine, which is two cysteine molecules connected to each other through a disulfide bridge. And that's not as rare as glutamyl-cysteine, but it's still pretty rare. So whey, because of these peptides, and they're very, very delicate. They, again, I think anybody that's used whey or even sort of partially looked into whey knows about things like low temperature processing. They've kind of peripherally have a sense, they've read that whey has to be produced a very specific way under low temperature conditions and so forth to preserve those delicate little molecules. Well, that all comes from Dr. Bunos's research. This is all learned by him. And great story, peripheral story. He only learned this, that he was doing his research and the shipment of whey that he was waiting for his lab broke down in the hot sun and baked in the sun all day. And when the whey got there and they tested it, it didn't do anything. It didn't have any effect on glutathione. And this was his aha moment that whey wasn't just generally good, but it had to be processed under these low temperature conditions and that type of thing. But like so many scientific discoveries, it was by mistake. And it was one of those little tidbits he put in his papers. So one reason among many, I've always been a big fan of whey and been researching whey, and I've done consulting work for big dairy companies like Glanbia. In fact, I was their first consultant in the US. They were a little Irish company that had a fantastic process for making whey, and they couldn't give it away in the US because it was so expensive. And so they came to me and said, you seem to be the guy who's really up on this, and could we pay you to help us explain why companies should want our product, because, it was like double the price at the time. And it still is. Very few companies use Glanbia's isolate pure because it costs a lot. So most companies, if they use it, they tend to, use it with other sort of a mixture of proteins. So that's sort of my journey with whey. I've been, gone in various scientific conferences and stuff to discuss the benefits of whey. But it brings us around to where we are at now, back to glutathione. But whey, as far as anti-aging, immune support, muscle preservation, right? Sarcopenia is epidemic in this country. It's epidemic. You all know what sarcopenia is, I'm assuming, right? All right. So you're right. Everybody knows sarcopenia. Well, if you look at Brink Zone.
Let me just say really quick so sarcopenia, just for any of those who don't know what that is, that's an age-related loss of muscle and strength. Go ahead, Will.
Yeah.
And Robbie's favorite word. And Robbie's favorite word.
I don't know
about the sarcopenias quite a bit.
Well, that's good. Okay. Well, as a physiologist, as an exercise physiologist, that would make sense, Yeah. But I mean that it's epidemic. I wrote the first article on sarcopenia 20 years ago. Again, when it was nobody even heard of it. everybody knew about osteoporosis. Osteoporosis was the big term, but none of these doctors and stuff had ever heard of sarcopenia, which they go hand in hand. I mean, you almost can't really have one without the other, frankly. Again, everything is so interrelated. Your muscles attach to your bones, and your muscles are what stress your bones and give you bones. This isn't rocket science, And if you don't have muscles because you're losing them, because you're not exercising, you're not getting adequate protein, especially higher quality protein, the older we get, again, the less efficient we get at digesting and absorbing protein. And so it becomes more and more important to really try to focus those protein sources on the highest quality stuff you can get. And of course, back to glutathione. Again, glutathione status is directly linked to aging. The older we get, the less glutathione we seem to have floating around. And now you have to be careful with making cause and effect from those associations. That's correlation. And that's always in the scientific world a no-no. It's okay to talk about correlation, but you really have to not make the then leap to causation, to say, well, these two are correlated and therefore they are one causes the other, and that you can't do that. I mean, at least not officially. You shouldn't. But there's quite a bit of actual research feeding older people and younger people in whey. So again, I think it brings us back to me, it's a staple. I think it should be a staple in everybody's. I've only got 2 or 3 supplements that to me are just absolute staples that never go away. And whey would be one of those. And now when you bring COVID into it, it just, to me, takes on a whole new, and I actually did write an article on Brink Zone specific to whey and COVID, because whey also has a really interesting little trick up its sleeve. And that is, so this is going to get a little bit heavy, but I'll do it really quick. The virus, to get into your cells and attack you, the virus attaches to something called an ACE2 inhibitor. An ACE2 receptor. So on your cells, you get these little receptors, and one of them is called ACE2, and that actually regulates your blood pressure and stuff, which is why some people get COVID, their blood pressure shoots up and they die. Whey actually has these natural ACE inhibiting peptides, which attaches itself to those little. Now they have been doing research with ACE2 inhibitor drugs. ACE2, if any of you have high blood pressure, you are likely on an ACE2 inhibitor. It's a very typical drug to control blood pressure. So one of the added tricks, the one added little bonus of whey is that it has these peptides that are natural ACE2 inhibitors. And there has been studies that show whey lowers blood pressure. Now, we're making a leap. Can we make the leap to say taking whey is going to prevent, you got to be careful that, that's as far as you can get without leaping too far and saying, oh, whey is going to stop the virus from getting into your cells. I don't know. You clearly can't make the leap, but it's a pretty, I find it a really interesting little, yet one more trick up the sleeve. And if we talk about whey in general, again, remember, whey has been in our diet. Human mother's milk is 60% whey and almost 15% lactoferrin. Cow's milk is all casein. It's a whole different protein. It's only got about 10% of whey is in cow's milk. Whereas us humans have been exposed to whey from day one. Day one we popped out. Whey was what we were eating. Whey is what gave us our immune system, conferred from our mother, along with our immune cells. The lactoferrin is what, again, controlling iron and good for your immune system. And I, again, find that really telling. I find it very telling that the first meal, from here I am talking about what makes sound a little esoteric, bodybuilders and this, but the first thing you were eating, unless you got formula, was whey. That's what you were pretty much sucking on, was whey, and obviously immune cells and all that. So this has been, we've been exposed to this as our kind of, and some people, of course, you say, well, once you're older and your digestive system is mature, and maybe whey doesn't have the same benefits and all that, which is perfectly reasonable. But I just find that really, it takes away a lot of this sort of esoteric thing, or like what your mother said to you, Robbie, when you just eat food. Well, that is the original food. I mean, it doesn't get any more original than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You say, Ma, you fed me. I can't get it from you anymore, but just FYI, that's what you were feeding me, 20 years ago or whatever. So I mean, that's like it's like the core food as far as I'm concerned. And
yeah, that's
Yeah.
That's a really great point. That's awesome in terms of talking about human mother's milk. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's mostly whey.
I mean, that's pretty eye-opening. You know, it is 16% lactoferrin, 60% whey. That's very eye-opening, and you can get that in a whey product. And so the product that Will recommends, that the one specifically that I've tried, is by Life Extension. Again, neither of us are. He was a consultant, has been a consultant to the company, but he doesn't have any financial ties to selling the product, and neither do I. In fact, it's something new that I've been trying, and I'm loving it. It's amazing. So it's by Life Extension, and it's their whey protein. And man, you shared so many gems in today's discussion. I would like to, because I know I plan to do this, so I do want to share, but we got to keep this short so we can still turn over to questions, right? We're definitely running long today. Hopefully you guys have found tremendous value in this. I'm sure you have. I know how you couldn't. You've really provided amazing value with us today, Will. So thank you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed it. I tried to stay sort of on topic, because I can really go into all kinds of places there.
So we should talk about one more thing though.
Yeah.
And that is and if we can kind of just condense, is creatine, right? Creatine is that supplement that can make you stronger, because it is the fuel that your body uses for workloads that are intense, meaning like 30 seconds or less. And to not get too into the physiology of it, basically you have 3 different energy zones, and your body produces energy differently in 3 different zones. But the thing to know is they all work together. So long story short, the most intense energy zone is heavily used by creatine phosphate and also stored ATP. And ATP is simply this molecule called adenosine triphosphate, which is like the gasoline for your body. It's actually what it actually uses to actually drive and create the power in actions and cellular function in your body. So what they found is, and I'll let you illustrate more of this, Will, but in creatine is actually extremely healthy for your brain function as well. And they've actually found that the neurons are actually using this creatine for a substrate and fuel source as well, which can activate more brain function. I'll let you talk more about that, Will.
Well, so the story of creatine for me is very similar to the whey story, where 30 years or so ago, creatine was kind of a big deal, and the bodybuilders we were all taking it. And I, started to dig into the literature, the published scientific literature, and again started to find just amazing health related anti-aging benefits. And I mean, creatine, if anything, is even more interesting to me than whey in some respects. At least there's more data. Freaking thousands, just stacks and stacks of studies on creatine. So, and the longer I look, the more creatine just continues to surprise me, where benefits that I just didn't think of come out of the woodwork. I mean, for example, it's very effective on non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. I mean, okay. I mean, that's just like, talk about random, very effective on that. Denser bones, again, we're back to things, but I think to what you were saying specifically, Robbie, brain health, it looks very neuroprotective. The DOD, which is the Department of Defense, not recommended, but at least identified creatine as being so highly brain protective for, again, all these soldiers. Remember, they've got traumatic brain injuries, right? The NFL has been interested in creatine because of traumatic brain injuries. It's very protective, neuroprotective, as we like to call. And there is also good studies on it improving like cognition and a number of things. Mood, there's a number of studies finding benefits of mood and depression with creatine. So it's a long one, and I just always keep finding things. Again, random thing I just didn't even think of, but I found there was a study, a very powerful study that actually found that creatine made chemotherapy work better, much better. And again, at first glance, that doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, but it actually does make, again, once you get a little deeper into it, it makes perfect sense. And oncologists and cancer doctors who work with cancer and stuff, there's something called T-cell burnout, where the cancer treatments, especially the chemo, stops working. It's just not being effective anymore. And the reason is what they call the T cells, which are these primary immune cells. They just run out of energy. They just burn out. It's just the term itself, right? And so they found that in animals, when they gave them creatine plus the chemotherapy started working again because the T cells had energy. The ATP and the creatine is the universal energy molecule for every cell in your body. So, I mean, again, talk about just like random stuff that I would never have put together. And it's on Brink Zone. So again, don't worry about it. Just go to Brink Zone, type in something like creatine and cancer or creatine immunity or whatever. And man, I was just blown away. But I am constantly discovering a variety of wide-ranging benefits of creatine on the brain, on the body, on again, heart, bone tissue, muscle tissue. It just kind of goes on and on. As always, we can always say as a scientist, I will always say we need more data. There's a lot of these areas that I'm talking about where the studies might be on the smaller side, or they need to be followed up sometimes with larger studies. I mean, if there was ever a criticism about some of this that other scientists might have, especially when they're anti-supplement. Again, most doctors have no understanding at all of creatine, much less that it has all these benefits. Even though, like I say, the Department of Defense recognized this molecule 10 plus years ago as something that needs to be should be considered in research for TBI. And again, good old machinery of government, to any of these guys, and because TBIs in this particular war, traumatic brain injuries were really the primary injury that these guys were having. Missing limbs, and TBI, it was like, that's the big one. Every war has its own, kind of key injuries. Well, IEDs has been much what these guys were facing. And so there's a big blast wave that comes through. And if it doesn't kill you, it just rocks your brain, really, really badly. And so you have a traumatic brain injury. But where that comes from, where that damage comes from, is something called hypoxia, which is lack of oxygen. And the brain is very energy demanding organ. It uses up most of your glucose. I think like 60% of your glucose is used up by your brain. And it is very intolerant of I mean, again, if you cut off your glucose supply and your oxygen supply, you've only got minutes. I mean, it's a very intolerant organ of not having oxygen and glucose. You've got like 3 to 4 minutes or whatever it is till unlike your heart or other things, it can tolerate quite a bit. So because that creatine is able to maintain the energy stores in those brain cells, they will tolerate a much longer amount of time, before they run out of energy and you go hypoxic. When you go hypoxic, that's when we're back to things, free radical damage, iron release, or back to good old iron again. The cells fall apart and release a bunch of iron from your red blood cells, and it's a big mess. So yeah, creatine is one of my favorites. Now, Life Extension sells creatine, and they were the first anti-aging company to sell creatine. And in the 90s, I went to the owner and I said, you really need to sell whey and creatine to your members, because Life Extension's focus is older people that are interested in anti-aging and Life Extension, hence the name. It's not a sports nutrition company. And he said, well, this is bodybuilding stuff. Why would I want to sell creatine? I mean, and I said, look, just read the studies that I'm sending you. Don't judge creatine by what you think just read what I sent you. And he did. And he said, God, I had no idea. I had no clue, Will, that creatine and whey had all these, these anti-aging, health, anti-cancer, whatever benefits. So they were really the first company to give them credit to that was not in that sports nutrition space, that EAS or Twin Lab or whatever space, to start selling creatine. Unfortunately, they don't sell it. They only sell it in capsules, which is a big mistake. Because creatine is, cheaper just getting powder. And it bums me out that I don't usually send people to Life Extension that often to get their creatine, because the capsules, I put it in my coffee. I mean, as you know, that's a whole other other discussion. So
we'll have to talk about the Alpha Joe. I know we talked about it before the show, so we'll do a second episode. And when we do the second episode, we'll talk about Alpha Joe. And Will actually has a coffee supplement. It's actually it has cocoa, It has creatine. Help me out, Will. It has
Tyrosine and tyrosine.
Theanine and tyrosine, correct?
Just tyrosine.
Tyrosine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just 3 primary ingredients. That's all it is.
And then you just add it to your coffee. It's a supplement that you actually add to your coffee in the morning. It gives you more sustained energy instead of like more of a spike. It makes the energy a little more sustained and has all these benefits in it. But he's sold out right now. So he's like, I don't even want to talk about it because I can't provide it at this moment anyway.
Yeah, another couple of weeks, we should be able to get it back in production. But creatine is very hard to get right now. The supply side situation, the supply chain situation, like the whole planet is suffering, is affecting the supplement industry a lot too. And so we are back ordered and supposedly should have some creatine. But I can tell you in a nutshell. Here's the 20-second nutshell. 10 or so years ago, I did a video on bulletproof coffee, which I wasn't very complimentary on. And somebody said, okay, wise guy, what would you put in coffee? And I said, you know what? That's a fair question. What I love coffee. I'm a coffee person. So I came up with a recipe, which was those 3 key ingredients. And I and many others for about a decade, just made our own recipe every day. And about a couple of years ago, people just said, well, if you would just put this in 1 can for us, we would buy it from you. Because I've never sold a product. I've always been a consultant. I've always preferred to be in the back end, just quietly doing my thing and writing my papers. So I've never sold a product under my own name, but it was very consistent. People said, I don't know where to buy the 3 ingredients. I don't know the measurements, if you just put it in a can. And so I said, okay, I'll do it. I mean, it was pretty much that. So 10 years of people using the recipe, I put the green ingredients in a can and called it Alpha Joe. That's pretty much it. You can make it your own. And the recipe is, I give away free to this day. I mean, I don't, use my product or make it yourself. I don't care either way, but most people are like, well, cheaper and faster and easier, and you pick the ingredients yourself, so I'll go with the can. But I have continued to give away that recipe for anybody that wants to think I'm, only doing it for the quick buck or something like that. So I never took the recipe down. I continue to give the recipe to people.
So Will, let's go on to a question. So let's start with VIPs. If you have specific questions you'd like to ask, just go to reactions and click reactions, and then click above that, raise hand. And Fred has done that first. So Fred, you are up first.
All right. Thanks, Ravi. And nice to meet you, Will.
Nice to meet you, Fred. Looks cold. Or is that a green screen or is it
yeah,
cold?
that's a green screen. That's a white screen. That's a cold white screen.
All right.
Yeah, I do a lot of teaching, so I have these backgrounds.
You do live in an area, Fred, that's that cold probably right now.
Oh, not right now. Actually, it's pretty warm here. It won't get cold till about January. Yeah. Yeah, we're still a little too south. Yeah.
I left the Northeast about 6 years for Florida, and I don't even like to see pictures of cold at this point. So your picture made me cold.
I relate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm just looking into the future here.
Yeah.
So I've never done this in terms of having a blood screening and looking at all the things I would need to look at. So is there like something you would recommend saying of what should be checked when you go get, I'm calling it a blood screening, a blood test, whatever you want to call it, but all the things that should be checked to go, okay, that's where there's a deficiency, and then we can go ahead and go, whoa, I need to get to get the whey, I need to get that. Or
are you in the States?
No, I'm in Ukraine.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I can certainly get you a list. The reason I asked this because, like I said, the Life Extension has great packages of just the whole.
Yeah, I can get it shipped to me.
Yeah, well, I like the Life Extension because you go and you look under like male panel. It'll have hormones. It'll have your D. It'll have a whole. It's a pretty extensive list. Most doctors, unfortunately, unless they specialize in anti-aging medicine and stuff, their tests are very limited. And they look at very few things. And so anti-aging type longevity doctors tend to have a much lengthier list of things to look at.
Oh, so you just can't go to a blood lab and try to get it.
Again, I just don't, that's why I asked, because in some states you can, but you have to tell them what you want. They don't know what, see, if you go into a lab.
Yeah. Here
So
they have labs that you can go to.
Yeah. Now in Florida, you can do that. You can walk in and go to a lab, but you got to go look at the thing and check off. Now what you could do
Yeah, exactly.
So what you could do, you could go to the Life Extension and look at their blood panels and print that out and say, I want that, just say, hey, I want that,
Okay.
and that's pretty extensive. And like I said, they do hormones, which is also a whole other conversation we haven't even touched on, but anybody over 40 should have their hormones checked at least yearly, as far as I'm concerned. So that the hormones, they'll do your vitamin D status. It's a pretty extensive test. It's a good starting place. I mean, it's an excellent place to start, and then could always tweak it a little bit, but it'll give you it's a pretty extensive. You could just go and print that out and say
So use that as my template for
use that as a template. Go to lifeextension.lef.org, and then you'll see they're very big on blood testing, and they've got a whole protocol that you can.
Okay.
But in the States, like I say, different states are weird that way. Some states you got to get your doctor's prescription. Some states you can just walk in and so tell them what you want. But that's a good place to start. They've got a female panel. So for women, they've got a great female panel. They've got a male panel. And I would do the Cadillac one. Do the longest one.
Yeah.
That's the only way we get to look inside our body and see what's going on. Everything else is just a wild ass guess. And I don't know why, again, more people don't see the benefits of regular blood work, but anybody over 40, I say I recommend at least yearly, a minimum. And like I say, when you go to your typical doctor, unfortunately, people say, "Oh, I had blood work and I'm fine." And I'm like, "What do they look at?" I don't know, cholesterol. Okay, well, that's not. You're made of more than cholesterol.
Yeah.
Did they look at your lipoproteins? How about your hormones? How about your thyroid? And so on and so forth. So yeah, you really can't. And I'm not being anti-doctor. Some of my best friends are doctors, but doctors are what they are. Unless, like I say, unless they're specializing and really focused on anti-aging and all that, which is not a lot. They tend to be they just check off their 3 or 4 things that they look at, total cholesterol and a couple other doodads, and you're really not getting, especially the hormones. They really do. I don't know in other countries, but there's what I call hormone phobia in the US. Doctors are there's literally a phobia about talking about hormones. I don't know why, but they are scared to death of hormones.
It's true. Yeah.
And they'll fight with you. They will literally fight with you. Say, look, I'd like to know what my hormones are doing. They'll say, you don't need that.
Yeah.
Pardon my French, but I didn't fucking ask you what I need, doc. I'm telling you, I want my hormones checked. Yeah. That pisses me off with doctors. I love doctors. Like I said, they're great. However,
like your testosterone.
Thing from doctors. All I ask from doctors is be open-minded and work with me. If you're going to tell me what I need, then we're going to have a problem.
Yeah.
Like testosterone is a hormone, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that would be,
that would be an important, absolutely. And they will test not only they'll test your total testosterone, they'll test your free testosterone. They'll test another one that most doctors never test in men, which is estradiol, because they were in medical school 1,000 years ago. They were told that estradiol is a woman's hormone. It's not a woman's hormone. We all have the same hormones. We just have them in different ratios. Right. Women need testosterone. Testosterone is absolutely essential for women, just as it is for men, just in different amounts. But in women, they don't tend to test testosterone, and in men, they don't test it. So they'll test all that. Yeah, your estradiol and all that's really important to know, especially say past 40, because as we all know, after 40, you can't get away with things. You have to be on the ball, about stuff and whatever. I mean, that's kind of a dividing line biologically, but some people it's 50, some people, it divides. I think in general, 40 seems to be a pretty good spot where if you notice like hormones going, having problem, that sort of seems to be a pretty good spot. And I recommend, like I say, everybody, but yeah, some doctors, like I say, they'll fight with you over it. They'll refuse to do it.
If I could make a point, so like one of our VIPs is asking, Lena, who will interpret the results of MD if MDs are not necessarily educated? So a couple of things on that. One is, and I generally share the same views as Will, but it's like CrossFit. CrossFit isn't bad. It's not, it's the way some people do that, right? It's not like I talk about yoga a lot. I bring up yoga because it's something a lot of people do. It's not that doctors are bad. Of course not. These people are extremely well educated. They spend a heck of a lot of time becoming, it's certain groups and how they look at things and the way that they're educated or the way that they apply methods. So I want to be really careful not to badmouth any specific group. It's because
I work with doctors. I know doctors, and but like with any profession, there's a few good ones and a whole lot of not very competent ones, and that's every profession. I mean, lawyers, doctors, carpenters, trainers, right? You know,
Right.
that's kind of the same thing. I call it the 10% rule.
Yeah.
It's 10% in any profession. I don't care what the educational level is. About 10% of the people are decent at what they do, are really good. Another 20% of them are adequate, and the rest of them suck.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't care if it's hammering nails or being a plumber or making a drink or whatever. I call it the 10% rule.
And I was just seeing Lena's other question. She's really asking, like, well, who will interpret the results?
Right.
If it's not the medical doctor, who
Well,
do you go to?
And that's and that is a really important question. So think about tests. Always ask for a copy of the test. They're not hard to read. They are difficult to interpret, but they're idiot proof to read. So there'll be a little graph and it'll say normal is between this and this, and you are here, literally. I mean, they make them idiot proof, even for the doctors. Now, that's the easy part. At least you can say, okay, well, it looks like I'm low on this or I'm high on this. Yes, the difficult part is what to do about it. What does one interpret? But and this is where, again, you know, you have to either find a doctor that you like and you can work with and educate them. You know, good doctors will say, I don't know that much about this, but I'll look into it. That's all you're asking. I mean, you can't know, doctor. I don't expect everybody to know everything. They just can't. And that's all I ask from them. However, you know, I've brought things up to a doctor that I worked with. Actually, it was about vitamin D. This was 10 years ago. And he said, "Why, you know, you get sun?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "But I want to get it checked." And he didn't know anything about it, but he said, "Okay, yeah, let's check it." He said, and then he said, "You know what? I think I want to get mine checked because you seem to know what you're talking about. So he came back really, really low, and he was blown away because he's a surfer. He's a surfer dude. And he's like, "I can't believe I'm low on vitamin D. And you've totally turned me on to this." And then we got him on some vitamin D. And the funny thing was that, again, he was getting all freaked out about, you know, 2000 IU. Oh, it's a lot. That's a lot. And we couldn't, 5,000 brought me up to normal. We could not get him up to normal till he got to 20,000 IUs. And he just couldn't believe that he would have to take 20,000. He was, again, medical school. He was taught that your eyes and your liver fall out at 20,000. You're going to die. But he is an Asian person. Now it's interesting. Again, different races are very, vitamin D is very, very tied into our evolution. The reason that we're white, the reason that us white people are on this thing is because as we went north in the cold, our pigmentation, our melanin got less and less to get more sunlight in, to make more vitamin D. This is pretty much the only reason that we're pink and they're not. The reason that people are in, you know, because you would have, if you were a white person in Africa or whatever, you're going to probably get, well, sunburned, of course. But one of the primary evolutionary changes in our melanin content was because as we spread out into the colder regions. So yeah, he was an Asian. Asian people tend to have a difficult time metabolizing vitamin D. And so we had to get him up to 20,000 IUs a day, of which he resisted every inch of the way. But every time his test came back at 5,000, it was low. 10,000 was low. You know, he fought me all the way on that. So
let's move on to
So you do have to find a doctor that, this is the challenge, is finding a decent doctor you can work with, who can interpret what they're reading and what.
And by the way, for everybody actually, but especially for our VIPs, we have specific naturopathic doctors that we recommend. And Dina's just posted a link here in the chat. She can also help you, but we're more than happy to share with you specifically who we refer and recommend, and like who we see personally ourselves. So, and you know, since COVID has happened, now doctors are able to see patients across borders outside of the state and stuff, because they've opened that up so that doctors can serve so many more people, which is really nice.
Yeah, it's worked out well. There's not a lot of silver linings to COVID, but that's one of them. You know, one of them is that they're all very open-minded about telemedicine now, and I think it's here to stay. I mean, I think telemedicine is now here to stay because they learn they can do it. They can do it almost as well as meeting you in person. So I think that's one of the few benefits of COVID was telemedicine.
Let's go to Nancy. Will.
Yeah.
Thanks. I have a few questions. You had mentioned that you take 2 or 3 staple supplements, and I am kind of presuming that that's NAC and D and creatine and whey protein. Is that correct, or is there something I was missing?
Well, I take a lot of supplements, so I sort of look at supplements, and I wrote an article on this called the supplement pyramid. I sort of like the FDA food pyramid. I tend to look at supplements in a pyramid, which is There's the foundational stuff that you take every day, no matter what. There's the stuff in the middle that, you know, you take most of the time. You may switch some out, you may switch some in. And at the very top is like sort of like special use stuff. So foundationally, at the very bottom, for me, would be whey and creatine, vitamin D, a decent multivite, lactoferrin. I've got a pretty hefty amount of supplements that I take every day that I consider, you know, pretty foundational. But I mean, I think at least that sort of 4 or 5 of them.
But Will, the way, so
Fish
Will,
oil.
let me help create clarity.
Yeah.
So the whey has lactoferrin, right?
Yes.
And it has amazing properties to help boost glutathione, correct?
Yes.
So if you're getting whey, it's like, so let me ask you the question that what are the, you know, because I think any area in life, like what is the one domino, right? That's like how I teach nutrition. That's why I only talk about protein, a gram per pound of lean body mass, vegetable, fruit, and water. It's not because that's all that matters, but it's the one domino that if you knock it down, you're going to knock down a ton of dominoes and get amazing results.
Yeah.
So in terms of supplements, what's the one domino or the 2 or 3 dominoes that if we knock down, we get like, man, those are the most powerful. Those, you got to start there, basically. What are the 2 or 3?
Yeah, like I said, a good multivitamin is a no-brainer. Creatine, again, for me, is just a must-have. I like whey again. Thing about whey, remember, you're not just getting glutathione, you're getting protein, you're getting lactoferrin, it's a whole food. So I would still probably take my whey over NAC as a foundational thing, and you'll maybe have at least one shake a day of the whey. Fish oil, good high quality fish oil is a big one to me. I think that's another one. You know, unless you're eating, you know, sardines and stuff every day, which I don't, and very few people eat all that much. Everybody says, "Well, I eat fish," but they eat fish that isn't really particularly oily. You know, I mean, unless you're eating mackerel and sardines every day, which gets really boring, you're really not getting as much fish oil. And again, that blood test also, you can also get blood tests for your fish oil status, your EPA, DHA status, to see how they look at your red blood cells. So those to me are really foundational. I think those, you know, couldn't really go wrong with that. If you're taking good multivitamin, again, Life Extension has some really good multivitamins. There's another few other companies that are quite good. But I have to say my default company is usually Life Extension. Unless somebody doesn't have, if they don't have something I want, then I'll go somewhere else. But pretty much, you know, as long as they got what I want, Life Extension is my default, because I know the owner as well as I know, and I know what a quality control and sourcing and all that. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, of course, that is how many companies claim or pretend or whatever that they get all their products from, you know, the bestest sources, and they test everything and all that, most of which is not true, unfortunately. So, you know, and they'll see some picture, some guy in a lab coat, which is, you know, the cousin of the owner, who they, you know, took his picture in the lab coat and all that. So unless I personally know the company and I've worked for them and done consulting work and know them on the back end, been to their facility and all that, I you know, whatever I'm going to put in my body, pretty much what I'm going to recommend. And then again, it's not a negative to anybody else. People ask me about companies all the time. I just can't say. That might be great. I just don't know. You know, I can't vouch. I can vouch for a handful of companies. Jarrow Formulas is very good, though they were sold recently. So now I'm worrying about, you know, I hope they didn't sell, you know, and maybe I hope the quality control and all that. But Jarrow's a good company. NutriBio is a very good company, especially for bulk stuff. I like NutriBio. NutriBio actually makes my product too. And they're not a contract manufacturer. He's just doing it as a friend of mine. I twisted his arm to make my product for me because I like his factory, and I like his work ethic, and I like the way he does things. He's OCD he's OCD to the max.
Will,
he is so over the top about testing and sourcing and all that.
So Will, I have my team on my butt about us staying on track so that we get to everyone's
All right. So who else has questions? We can,
because I know you, Will and I, by the way, so one of our meetings, we talked for 3.5 hours in this type of discussion. So I know where this can go. So, and then our VIPs have this thing where they're like, hey, I want to be there because it's amazing value, and they won't log off. They're like, no, I'm going to stay there because I don't want to log off. So we have to like manage their time for them. So that's my responsibility. So
did I answer those questions at least adequately so far? Everybody okay with their?
No, you're doing amazing.
Right.
This is amazing. And I know they're all getting value, but I feel personally responsible to help manage.
He's got a hand up there. I see a
And
yellow gold.
I still have more as well.
Yeah, Nancy,
Okay,
like,
Nancy.
go. And
So the creatine, the brand, and how much of that do you recommend?
All right. So problem with this gets a little complicated. There's 2 places in the whole planet that make creatine. And that's Germany and China. That's it. Every brand you see comes from one of 2 places. And the only product I will personally use is the German stuff because China makes shit. Bottom line. So the company that makes German creatine is called CreaPure. And that's who I would use and recommend. That's, and they're more expensive. But if you even if you go to CreaPure, they've got a list of companies that carry it, and you'll even see there's a little trademark logo called CreaPure. Any company that's using that as their source is fine. So as long as you go find a company that's selling CreaPure, and you get your best price on it. I will say Life Extension uses it, but it's in capsules. And again, it's just, creatine has no taste. It's so tasteless. You just put it in your drink. And dose wise would be 3 to 5 grams a day. That is a very typical dose.
And did you mention yet, Will, I don't know if I'm reading the chat too. So did you mention yet the type of creatine? Creatine monohydrate.
Yeah,
because they make
treated monohydrate. Yeah, CreaPure will always be
multiple types of creatine, and again, Will, the brinkzone.com, you can read all about that and why and what. He has amazing articles on that. But creatine monohydrate, the simple answer is creatine monohydrate. If you want to know why specifically, go to brinkzone.com, look up creatine. You'll see that there.
Yeah, and just type in CreaPure in Brinkzone, and you'll see a video that says why CreaPure. And I talk about why. I did a bunch of tests in the 90s and posted it in the magazine showing that Chinese stuff was really subpar. They've gotten better since then, but so yeah, German creatine is pretty much the answer, and 3 to 5 grams a day is pretty much it.
Nancy, did you have another question?
Yes, for vitamin D, when we get our levels tested, which I have, how often should we get them tested, and what is too high or what's an adequate range? Because I think I'm pretty adequate.
So the range, if you look at the test, is normal, or 50 to about 70 nanograms. It'll tell you, I don't know what your numbers were, but it'll put you kind of in the middle to 2/3 higher. There's a range. You'll look at the test and it'll say, I'm just making numbers up, 0 to 100, and it'll say you were 72. Well, obviously you can discern yourself that you're towards the higher end, 72 being closer. And I think for the most part, you anything below 50, you don't want to go below 50 is a pretty common answer. Again, really good article on there by Monica on Brinkzone about vitamin D and you levels you want to achieve. And if your numbers are good, then I wouldn't say more than once a year. If you're having trouble getting to the numbers you want, then you're going to have to test a little more often until you get those numbers you're trying to get to. But if you're getting the numbers you want on the lab test, whatever dose that is, and like I said, I would. It probably should be a core. When I said like core, I probably should say magnesium, frankly, because as I said, about 80% of the population is deficient. And there's so many benefits of magnesium that I probably really should have just said that's one of my, at this point, I think I should add that as to one of those must-haves, because there's a lot of benefits to magnesium, not just D. I mean, D, we brought that in because of earlier, but so yeah, if your numbers are good and you're happy with the numbers, I would say once a year. If you're not, then you're going to start raising doses and tweaking things, and you might have to do it more like every couple of months until you get what you want.
Okay, and for whey protein, just 1 shake a day?
1 to 2 scoops. The most products are a 20-gram scoop. That's a pretty typical dose. So pretty typical amount of whey is a 20-gram scoop. To taste, I like 2 scoops in a blender. I wouldn't buy them pre-made. Don't buy one that's like pre-made with water, and you want to get the powder and make a healthy drink yourself with a handful of frozen organic berries. I like to put a little avocado in there. That's actually pretty good. You get the healthy oils in there. I put in frozen or fresh kale. I mess around with that a little bit, but you can make, a real meal out of that. You could also put in some like Udo's choice oil, and that's a whole other discussion. EFAs, we never even got to essential fatty acids. That's a whole other talk there. Another one I introduced EFAs. I was the first one to write about EFAs in the magazines in the mid 90s or so. And this was sort of towards the end of the low fat craze, which is the most miserable, horrible, unhealthy way to live, diet, whatever. But we went through this phase in the 80s towards early 90s where it was all about super duper low fat everything. And of course, all you got was dry skin, lost hair, and diabetics. It's pretty much what you got out of low fat. The worst way to lose weight possibly would be on a low fat, a super duper low fat diet. So I wrote an article with Dr. Erasmus, who really, again, wrote the book on EFAs. EFA stands for essential fatty acids. So that's another one. And also just type in EFAs on Brink. I had a great interview with Dr. Erasmus not that long ago. But you can make some really good shakes to taste that are really have a very well-rounded nutritional profile, depending on what you like. Some people cringe at the idea of frozen kale, and people hate kale. I don't know why. I don't know why there's such anti-kale out there, but I love kale.
Okay, so 2 quick questions then. On NAC, you mentioned that whey protein was more efficient than NAC. So do you not recommend taking NAC separately?
So I generally, like I say, I tend to actually use them both, especially during these, considering what we're dealing with right now. I tend to use them both. What I do is on the days that I'm taking whey, I'll probably take half a dose of NAC, like some later time. And if I am not using whey, I will take 600 milligrams in the morning of NAC, and I will take another 600 later on. Split them. You want to split them up because, like I say, glutathione is in the system very short. You want to try to get the steadiest levels as you can.
Okay, brand for that?
Life extension. Life extension or NutriBio is good. Is very good. Last time Life Extension was out, I got it from NutriBio. Jarrow's another good. Jarrow's a good company. JARROW.
Okay, my last question. Vegetarian or vegans, are we getting enough iron, or how do these recommendations change?
I am not a fan, to be honest with you. Now, I have a whole article on Brinks called vegan eating. I'm not a huge, not that you can't be healthy. I mean, not that it can't be done, but it does take a lot more work. You got to really be careful. Again, the only way to know if you're getting sufficient iron plus B12 plus essential fatty acids is blood work. You have to be really on top of that stuff. We are omnivore animals. That is our physiology, and we have been such since the dawn of the species. And so I'm not a big fan. I mean, obviously being a vegetarian is a lot easier than being a vegan, as far as, eating and getting adequate protein and all that. But there's really, again, I like to look not just at, physiology and biology. I like to look at historical record and anthropology and all that. And us humans have been, omnivores and eating meat for at least 3.5 million years, at least. That we know of. And so I guess the only thing I would say, the only aspect of vegan and vegetarian eating that holds weight for me is the moral ethical part. I get that. And I actually can see being a vegan or whatever based on that, the moral ethical part that you just have, a moral issue with eating. And I get that. I can live, that works for me. If somebody says, I don't think it's probably not optimal for my health, I probably should be eating XYZ, but morally, I don't want to eat animals. And that is perfectly valid.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and that's where I'm at.
Okay, so
there you go. I have to deal with that.
Right. And I think that is a perfectly valid reason. I get that. I get that one. It's the other ones that drive me. As a scientist, the ones that drive me crazy is when somebody says, humans weren't meant to eat meat. Look at our teeth, look at our digestive system, blah, 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 blah. That's the stuff that gets me, then I get irritated, or I will push back, a bit on that. And in my article on vegan eating, I pretty much go through all of the reasons that they claim, like we should eat like our closest relative, the chimpanzee, because they're a sweet, loving chimpy chimp. They are the nastiest warlike animals you've ever seen in your life. They eat other chimps. They go to war. They, in fact, in one part of Africa, they have made extinct a red monkey they ate to extinction. Chimps, chimps are some nasty, aggressive animals. There is nothing sweet nor, any of that type of thing. So, again, this is all complete mythology as to, oh, we should eat like I can say, we should eat like our closest relatives, those sweet fruit-eating chimps. Complete horseshit. So I basically conclude with, in my article, that the only thing that holds weight to me is the moral, ethical, and I get that, and I think that is a perfectly valid reason. But you really do have to work at getting adequate iron, B12, essential fatty acids. Remember, there's no fish oil, type of thing, and that does require just being really getting blood work done. And again, as usual, if the blood work comes out good, then there's no real pressure to test it all the time, But if it's not coming out, like you're anemic, or your red blood cells are low or deficient in fatty acids or whatever, well then you start to bump those things up. You retest in a couple of months, and until you kind of get where you want to be. So the answer is maybe, I guess, or as it depends, but.
So you do recommend taking iron for those who are anemic?
Oh, if they need to. I mean, again, iron. The problem with iron is it's not very absorbable, and you're not getting it in that stabilized form where, there's a couple of companies that claim that they've got this stabilized, iron. I'm not really sure. I haven't looked into it enough, to be honest with you, to see. But you're doing yourself more harm than good by generally just eating iron, the basic iron oxide pills, which is literally rust. Right. Taking iron with a vitamin C does really dramatically improves the absorption. But I haven't, because I'm not, a vegan, and I don't deal with a lot of the people that I known or whatever anemic. It wasn't really lack of iron per se. It was more other things like, irregularities in menstrual cycles and hormone issues. So it wasn't like I had to force them. I didn't really have to find them an iron product. There's a vegan iron product that claims to be a stable type product with really good absorption. That's who is it by Udo's company, and they're generally a very good company. I mean, I would tend to believe them. They don't tend to make stuff up like that. They make Udo's Choice Flora, Flora, Flora makes a vegan iron supplement that I haven't looked into in any real depth, but I tend to trust them in that respect. And they claim it is a much more absorbable, stabilized form of iron. But it's really hard to. Again, I mean, I have a friend, she's a vegan, and she's very healthy. I mean, she's very focused on, eating the right things, and she really knows her stuff. And she's done a good job on her iron, but her B12 is another one, essential fatty. Oh, and creatine. Actually, I'm glad you brought this up. Vegans are notoriously deficient in creatine because they're not eating any meat. And so for vegans, people that eat meat and take creatine, they may or may not notice any big differences, but vegans who eat creatine usually can notice some very substantial differences in things like energy levels and mood and stuff. So I'm glad I connected those two. So yeah, for vegans, I would think creatine really would be a must. I have to say, I should have connected those two. An interesting little factoid, which the vegan community doesn't like to talk about, however, is that vegans and vegetarians, but mostly vegans, are consistently have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and self-harming type behaviors. And that is a consistent finding. Why that is, again, you can't make cause and effect out of that, but I wonder if maybe it is lack of creatine. Maybe there's an aspect that we don't know is a cause of, do people that are, let's say they tend towards depression more likely to be vegans, or does being a vegan deplete you of certain nutrients the brain does need very specifically? Like you need omega-3 fatty acids. The brain is almost entirely omega-3 fatty acids. Something like, 70 or 80% made of basically omega-3 fatty acids. We need a lot of it, and the brain needs a lot of it. So if you are getting in those nutrients specifically that the brain really wants and needs, creatine would be one. A source of, now I know there are fish oils that are now being made from is it bacteria? Anybody? I'm blanking, not bacteria. You can get non-animal source fish oil now. It's called fish, it's not fish, it's called EPA and DHA. I'm just trying to remember how they make it, but it's expensive, but it is legit. It's not bacterial. I'm trying to think, single-celled organisms are making it. Anyway, I would definitely look into a vegan source of fish oil, which is EPA and DHA, which is again connected to mood, and it's associated with brain levels that have higher levels of those fats, because most of your brain, I mean, it kind of stands to reason that most of your brain is made of something. You want enough of it, and you just can't get it. There are no vegan sources of fish oils, hence why they're called fish oils. Well, I take that back. There are now bacteria. Somebody said, yeah. Freddie, is it bacteria?
Algae. It's algae.
Algae. Yeah, thank you. Yes, algae. Right. So
Cyanobacteria.
There are some genetically modified bacteria that on algae that produces. Now, of course, people say, well, it's a GMO. Do I want? Well, I mean, unfortunately, you're kind of in a, you're kind of caught between a rock and a hard place on that one. But anyway,
Okay,
if you want to get your fish oil from a genetically modified.
We need to go
All
on to Nicholas. Hey, welcome, buddy. Good to have you here with us. It's good to see you.
Hello, William.
Hello, Nicholas.
So I have a question because I take the perfect amino product, and I think some people here, they take it too, like Fred. Exactly. So I would like to know your opinion about this product, and it's a product with all essential amino acids inside of it. And how does this compare, for example, to the whey product that you talked about before?
Yeah, the whey is going to be a whole protein. I mean, look at it this way. How many in one pill of what you're taking? How many grams is that?
That's 1 gram, I think.
All right, it's 1 gram. So 1 scoop of whey. Now, I'm only assuming 1 for 1. Let's say it's a whole protein. Are you all the amino acids you need?
I take, for example, every day I take 7 grams. I take 7 pills of this.
So that's like 3 bites of chicken. So my point is that you'd have to eat 20 of those to equal 1 scoop of whey. You'd have to eat 40 of them to equal 2 scoops of whey. And they're not even whole protein. So I've never been a big fan of. Now there are some amino products that are a bit more targeted that I think, I have some interest in, like BCAAs, which are branched chain amino acids. Again, whey has the highest content of BCAAs of any protein known. But I'm just pointing out there are sometimes in some of those sort of targeted places where some aminos might be useful or interesting. The sort of general whole amino type products, I think they're definitely not best bang for the buck. They're not money well spent. I think you're not getting anything that, because I mean, any decent protein source, basic whole egg, chicken, beef, whatever, is going to have all those essential aminos in them. And so
they claim that the body can use much more of this, nearly 99%. But for other sources, it's much lower. Is this true, or how is your opinion?
I'd have to look at the product, but I will tell you this, that if they're individual amino acids, not peptides, then it is the opposite. Again, as I was saying, that isolationist.
It's isolated, so there are only the 8 essential ones, but in specific proportions.
So those are EEAs. Okay, so that's essential amino acids, EEAs. Yeah, there's nothing. I think I guess what I would say is if I was going to do an EEA product, I'd probably get it in powdered form, because you're paying money and stuff. A couple of companies like NutraBio does sell EEAs, which is those key, and you get them, but it's much more cost effective to to get it in a scoop and just put some EAAs. But again, I think this to me is trying to outfox or outsmart human biology, of which you're never going to do. And so the body, again, as a general rule, unless you're talking about treating specific disease or specific conditions is going to prefer a whole protein source, unless you're trying to, like say, unless you're trying to accomplish something very specific. Interestingly, that EEAs taken like with workouts looks beneficial. There looks like there's some benefit to that. There's some debate there, which there was a study where they took some EEAs, they added some BCAs, they added some other stuff, and it worked really well. And I thought, so basically what you've just invented is a scoop of whey protein for about 5 times the price is what you've done. Because, you know, they put all this stuff together. So I think if you're going to use it, like say, I would use probably a powdered EAA product, because it's going to be a lot more cost effective. 7 grams of EEAs, which is, you said you're taking 7. Again, if you think about it, it's a pretty small amount. I mean, if your normal intake of protein, your requirement for protein is in the 60 grams, and that's low. I mean, that's FDA or RDA, that's RDA low levels. That makes up a very small percent if you think about it. So I think my basic feeling is I just think there's money better spent. You know, you can only spend so much money, right? There's only so many things you want to eat, and so much thing you can pop in your mouth. And my feeling is that that's going to be low. That would be low on my cost benefit totem pole, if that makes any sense.
Then I have a second question for people who have joint issues. Do you recommend supplements for the joints? And among them, what do you think of products with eggshell membrane? Is this backed by science? Is this useful?
What was the ingredient?
It's eggshell membranes.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I don't
It's
have.
like collagen.
I haven't seen much. I haven't really seen any research on that. I mean, the stuff that I'm more interested in are the collagen type supplements, and they also have found that certain types of collagen, type 2, there's different types. Some that appear more effective on cartilage and on connective tissue. There's a sort of a specialized type 2. I'm more interested, you know, I think in the cartilage, the cartilage products, and some of them are processed to sort of get these beneficial peptides. So I know what you're talking about, but I haven't actually read anything specific about it. I'd have to see if there's any, there's any studies. I think we know that some fish oils, which are anti-inflammatory, there were some good studies on curcumin as an anti-inflammatory for joint pain. I've seen that. And I think as far as joint pain, glucosamine, and again, glucosamine and chondroitin has sort of gone out, kind of faded out of the popularity because the studies just weren't really that. But there are some hydrolyzed joint collagen products. I think those look the most interesting to me. Like say, you sort of have to go down the life extension only because they cater to an older a demographic, has a lot of good joint stuff, just because joint pain is a very common thing. But I haven't looked at that particular ingredient, so I couldn't give you a plus and a minus. But I'm in favor. I use hydrolyzed collagen myself in my drinks. I can't really report anything, to be honest with you. Some people claim they love their collagen products and they claim all kinds of benefits. I can't myself really report anything, all that. Of anybody else using any collagen products that they, I mean, a lot of people notice their hair, like a lot of women will say their hair and their nails and stuff dramatically improves using collagen, which makes sense, as far as joint aches and pains, I can't really, I wish I could report like amazing things. And unless anybody else has, like say, experience, that they can speak to, that they really notice the difference. It's not terribly expensive. It's one of those, when I was talking earlier about my pyramid, there's like the foundational stuff that I'm always going to take, that I think should be there. And then there's the stuff that's kind of in the middle of that pyramid, which I'll use if it's not too expensive, if there's decent data, it's not bad for me. That's where collagen is for me. It's kind of in the middle of my pyramid. I'll throw a few scoops of that in my whey drink, probably 4 or 5 days a week, but it's not one of my sort of absolute foundational products, if that makes sense.
Well, do you have a like a diagram or illustration on your pyramid? I'm guessing you do. You have a pyramid.
In fact,
that you can share.
It's in my ebook, which you can get for free off Brink. It's 500-page ebook. It's a monster. It's in there. In fact, I wrote. Where's the book? I don't know how some of you are old enough to remember this book. Well, you remember Bill Phillips' book? I don't know if you were even around for Bill Phillips' EAS book. Remember with the blue one? Well, I wrote chapter 11 of that, which was all about Body for Life. So chapter 11 was about that pyramid that was in the magazine. And I took that structure, and what I've done is I took that pyramid plus and wrote supplements. If anybody wants you can get a free copy downloaded called Bodybuilding Revealed off Brink Zone. And I sold thousands of copies of that back in the day. And I was early to sell, a book, a PDF book for fitness and bodybuilding in that space. And then, as time went on, I mean, there's no, it was found in, I had to update it, and that takes work, and I'm lazy. So the book is a little behind the curve, maybe on the latest, greatest science, but it's perfectly accurate. But it was basically a measure of me going into it and updating this 500-page book of supplements and training and all that, or saying, you know what, I'm going to give it away, as a loss leader, and people, you can't be mad at me for it not being as cutting edge as it might have been, 10 years ago, because it's free. So I'm not very good at revisiting projects. I'm good at moving forward, but I'm really bad at like wanting to go back and fluff stuff up, Same thing with writing. Writers spend years rewriting things and stuff, and I don't know how they do it. I write stuff. I'm done. I'm moving forward.
Will, we need to close out today's show, but we will have Will back on for a part 2 for sure. For this, we'll figure out a time for that. Patricia has posted, and Will, thank you so much. You're a wealth of information. We're going on the 2nd hour here, and I know that if we would go on to the 3rd and 4th and 5th, and
yeah, it's easy to do. I'm actually after I'm done here, I'm actually going to the Christmas party of the owner of the Life Extension.
Oh, very cool. Awesome.
That's where I'm going to be on my way to. I got to take a shower and shave and go do that. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed it. So you can see there it is, Bodybuilding Revealed. That is a direct link to the free ebook, and that supplement pyramid thing it's in that graphic is in there and kind of says, here's the foundational stuff. But again, I think some of my thoughts have changed a little bit over the years, but it's pretty straight. I mean, it pretty much covers the bases, I think, for most people.
And I will drop in the chat the link for next talk, which we're not going to do Christmas nor New Year's Eve. We're going to come back on, when is it? January 8th with Dr. Denise Warden. Hey, Will, thank you so much.
Thank you, Will.
You're super duper smart.
Well, I like to say, with a face like this, I better be. That's pretty much my response to that. So.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
All right, guys.
And since we're all going to see each other after the New Year's, not the VIPs, of course, Merry Christmas.
What do you mean,
Merry Christmas and all that.
Or we'll see them every
the
week.
VIPs, we're gonna see them on Monday, but all the other amazing humans, Merry Christmas.
Thank you. For those of you who are not VIPs, thank you for joining with us today. It's so great to have you here also. And to my VIPs, it's wonderful, of course, to have you here and bring you this amazing value with some of the best experts in the world on these subjects. And of course, I will see you this coming week in training. And
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to everybody.
Baby.
Make it an amazing weekend.
Thank you, Will.